Hi, my name is Jen McDowell. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we are going to be discussing grief and loss and why it is critical for us to discuss this and be able to talk about the importance of all of the losses that our kiddos go through who are placed into foster care. Throughout our time together, there are three objectives that I am hoping that we will be able to cover and that you can take away from our time together. The first one is for you to understand the impact of separation and ambiguous loss for children placed into foster care. The second is to learn different ways that children grieve. And the third is to recognize strategies to help children deal with the grief and loss that they are experiencing. All foster and adopted children must deal with the experience of loss. No matter how loving and welcoming their resource families are, which is you, they cannot erase a wrenching fact of their children's life, which is separation from their birth parents and families. So I want you just to take a minute to think about this. How would you feel if you were moving somewhere new and lost everything that was familiar? How would you want someone to respond to you? How long would it take you to accept this new change? A few additional thoughts about grief and loss. First of all, children need to know why their birth parents could not care for them. If we don't tell them, they're going to create reasons of their own. And yes, this has to be done in an age-appropriate way and in a way that they can understand. So your caseworkers will help you process that. Another point is that resource parents need to support the child by acknowledging and affirming the loss. I think sometimes it's easy for us to believe that if we talk about the loss or if we affirm the loss, that we're going to remind the child and cause them more sadness. However, the child is already sad, and I think it's helpful just to acknowledge the sadness and to give the child space to talk about how they're feeling. We also want to give and acknowledge that children may express loss and grief through difficult behaviors. I don't know about you, but it's not always easy for me to just say how I'm feeling. So sometimes that might come across through my behaviors or how I'm treating people, and that's same for our kids. Grief may also interfere with relationship building. It might be hard for them to want to develop a relationship with you. It might be hard for them to want to be a part of your family. What about when they leave your family? How will that feel for them? Or maybe they're feeling that they're betraying their birth family by building relationship with you. So these are all points that we need to remember as we're working with kids that are come into your home. In thinking specifically about the children and youth who are placed into foster care, let's think about some of the losses that they experience. As you can see on the slide, there are a number of losses or circumstances that the children lose, and this is not an all-inclusive list. So you may have some additional things that you would add, and I appreciate that. But the things that are listed on here are parents, siblings, extended family, friends, pets, belongings, familiar environment, traditions, school, control, routine, and privacy. So as you reflect on these losses, just take a minute to just look at them and then to ask yourself, how would you feel if this was your reality? Even if you lost half of these things, would you feel sad? Would you feel angry? And then how would you react if that was your reality? Maybe you would withdraw. Maybe you would cry. Maybe you would lash out. Maybe you would just be quiet because you don't know what to say. I think it's really important for us to spend some time thinking about how we would feel and how we would react in order to have compassion for the kids that are coming into your homes. Yes, they needed to leave their birth home due to safety or neglect or some issue, but that does not take away all of the losses that they are experiencing and feel. As we just noted on the previous slide, there are many losses that our kids experience and that they face. One thing that we're going to talk about right now is ambiguous loss. And as you can see on here, there's a definition, and actually this definition was taken from one of the handouts that you have been given. It's when a person is physically present but psychologically unavailable, or when a person is physically absent but psychologically present. And the latter type is what's most common for kids in foster care. So again, let's think about that. So it's when a person is physically absent but psychologically present. So that For our kids that come into foster care, they know that their birth parents are physically absent. They're not living with them. They're not part of their daily life. But psychologically, they're still present. So they think about them. It's not like their parent has passed away. They visit with them. So it's this ambiguous loss, and they're trying to figure out what to do with that. So when living in this type of loss, it often feels like you're living in limbo. Some questions that our kids might ask is, how long will I be here? When can I go home? Are my siblings or my parents safe? And because our kids cannot affect the outcome to these questions, they feel like they have little control over their lives. And I don't know about you, but I don't like when I feel like I don't have any control over what's going on in my life. When you don't have control, how do you respond? Do you withdraw? Do you become angry? Do you try to control everything that you can? It's important to think about your responses to these types of situations, again, in order to try to have empathy for the kids that are coming into your home. Kids also might have feelings of confusion, anxiety, or chronic sorrow, which can result from the ambiguous loss. So again, kind of we just talked about that in the point above, that there's going to be feelings of confusion, anxiety, and possibly chronic sorrow as they're trying to make sense of all that's going on for them. It can also be difficult to move forward when you have no idea what your future holds. Our kids need a lot of grace as they move through their grief journey. Again, it really helps me as I think through, what would this feel like for me if today I needed to move into your home because I wasn't able to live with what's familiar to me, the family who is familiar to me? What would that feel like? How would that be? How would I respond to that? So again, I really would encourage you to think about that, to put yourself in their situation. And I think as we begin to do that, we are able to develop empathy to be able to walk alongside of our kids the best that we can. We talked about a few of these questions on the previous slide, but I think it's important to really pay attention to them again. For our kids who have loss and are coming into your home as a result of being placed into foster care, some of the questions that they might have are, will I be reunited with my birth parents and siblings? Will my parents fight to get me back? How long will this take? Again, I think our kids have to live in this question. How long will this take? And for us, we might say, well, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but that is a really long time in the life of a child. Maybe they're also saying, what if I can never go home? And how do they deal with that reality as they're processing that? Another question they might have is, will I remain in the same foster home until I do go home? Or am I going to have to move again? And again, as we process this and think about these questions and think, how do children go on and do everyday life kinds of things like go to school, adjust to a new home, make new friends, while they're living with all of these questions in the back of their mind? It has to be so, so hard for them. And I think it really just gives us insight into some of what they might be thinking and why they're behaving in the way that they do. This video is taken from Speaking Grief Resources, which is found at speakinggrief.org. And I think the speaker just does an amazing job of explaining what grief feels like. There are 2 statements that really stood out to me, and she says, one of them, everyone else around you is behaving as if this is perfectly fine. And you are like, this isn't fine. This isn't what I signed up for. And something else that she says is, nothing is fine. There is a dissonance in what is happening in my world versus what is happening in everyone else's world. So let's take a moment just to listen to this. And I'd encourage you to pause and think, what stands out to you? What phrases that she says or imagery that she provides impacts you as you think about grief?
The best way for me to describe grief is like you're at a crowded movie theater and you've bought your tickets for a rom-com and you're there and the movie starts and it's been going for about 15 minutes and then all of a sudden the screen splits in two and melts and a horror movie starts in its place. This isn't the movie that you showed up for. This isn't what you bought tickets for. And everybody else around you is behaving as though this is all perfectly fine. And you're like, wait a minute, this isn't right. Like, this is a horror movie. This is not what I signed up for. And they're like, hey, it's just a movie. Just eat the popcorn. This is great. Right? When you're inside intense grief like that, you're no longer watching the same movie everybody else is watching. And because nobody else is watching that movie, they all think everything is fine. Nothing is fine, right? And it's that dissonance between what's happening in your world versus what's happening in other people's world. And the fact that we don't recognize that everybody is walking around with their own personal movie screen all the time.
I'm sure that most of you are familiar with stages of grief. And as you look at different stages of grief, as you do research, there's different language that's used for each stage. We're going to be using the language that's represented here on this slide to review the various stages of grief. So we'll look at shock, anger and protest, negotiating, deep sadness, and understanding. I love the visual that the pictures on this slide provide and help us see what maybe we wish that grief looked like and how it felt like versus how it really does feel. So as you can see, the one picture on the top, it appears as though that grief is going from one stage nicely into the next stage, and then we get to this point of understanding toward the end, and we never go back and experience any other stages of grief. However, the picture on the bottom shows a completely different picture. It shows that grief is messy, that grief is hard, that we might be in the stage of anger and protest and then go back to deep sadness and one to shock. So I just think it's really important to acknowledge that grief is messy, and that as you're caring for kids who are experiencing a lot of grief and loss, that you can think about the fact that the stages do not move nicely from one to the other, and that really they're all intermixed together. The first stage that we're going to look at is shock. So what are some behaviors that you might see during this stage? Maybe the child does not seem interested in anything. Maybe they do not express any feelings about leaving their birth family. Maybe they're going through the motions of normal behavior and compliance, but not being engaged in activities. Maybe they're very quiet, they're passive, and emotionally detached or numb. What can you do as the parent to help during this time? You can focus on safety and building trust, and do this with reassuring words and setting a clear home structure. You can engage the child slowly and respectfully, being mindful not to overwhelm them with all your enthusiasm or lots of other adult visitors. Follow the child's lead. If they want to play and not talk, allow for that. If they make requests for what is familiar to them, like familiar foods, do your best to accommodate the child. Be clear about why the child is with you and what your role is, but do not push this conversation if they're not ready. Be gentle and kind, validating that this must be hard for them and letting them know that you are there to support them. And give the child time to work through their emotions and feelings. Anger and protest is the next stage that we're going to talk about. And as you can see on this slide, there's a number of behaviors that your child may express during this stage. Tantrums, angry outbursts, being oppositional and hypersensitive, being withdrawn, being grumpy and hard to please, being aggressive with other children, breaking toys or objects, lying and stealing, refusal to comply with direction, eating and sleep disturbances, mutism or refusing to talk, or maybe even regression in toileting. I don't know about you, but as I read those, I think, oh my goodness, what could I do as a parent in order to help them? And here are some things that you can do. Set a well-defined home structure. The parent needs to be clear, yet compassionately in charge. And I'd like to just highlight the word compassionately for our kids who are going through this. Name and validate what you think they might be going on with them. So for example, maybe you say something like, Johnny, it makes perfect sense that you would be angry, considering all that you have lost and all that you're experiencing. Talk about what the child may be feeling and experiencing when they are calmer and more relaxed. Don't do this during a time when they are having an outburst or something like that. Give them space to calm down and then have conversation. Provide consequences that show them that you're on their side. Acknowledge their losses gently, out loud. They need to feel that you get it and that you care about them. Be mindful of physical and emotional safety and make sure the child You and other family members and pets are safe at all times. Offer physical outlets for their anger, such as playing a sport or throwing a ball or a frisbee, yelling into a pillow. Instead of just telling them not to do something, give them some choices of what they can do. And continue to share experiences of joy and pleasure, regardless of what the child may have done. So maybe they have had an outburst and you're feeling frustrated with them. Continue to share experiences of joy and pleasure, regardless that that just happened. Give them some space and say, wow, you know what? I can imagine that it's really hard. Here are some things that we're going to do with our anger. And now let's just go out and let's have fun. Let's play together. Let's play a game. Don't shame them because of their choices. Of course, we want to help them to work towards making more healthy choices in their sadness or their anger, but don't shame them and find positive ways to connect instead. The next stage that we're going to look at is the one of negotiating. During this stage, child's behaviors may appear in the following ways. Maybe they are eagerly to please you. Maybe they are following the rules and your directions very carefully. Maybe they are doing the things that they had not done before but now believe will look good, such as making their bed every morning or helping with household chores. And maybe you're wondering, like, why are they doing this? Why is this happening? And one of the things that I think they might be thinking is if they do well, if they're following the rules, then maybe they'll get to go home, right? They'll get what they're hoping, that maybe a change in their behavior will result in a different outcome. So what can you do? You can explain that the judge makes the decisions, that they're not in your home based on any negative behaviors that they have done, nor does it depend on their positive behaviors in order for them to go home. So we always use the language that the judge is the one who makes the decisions. We want to redirect the child to jobs that are theirs. So maybe reminding them of what their chores are, or doing the things that they can be doing just to be helpful members of the household. We want to remind them of your care for them regardless of how they are behaving. Again, we don't want our kids to have this thinking that they have to behave in a certain way to be loved. You can also help the child find and practice things that give opportunities for control and building mastery. So because control is such a big thing for our kids, they've lost all control, ask yourself, what are some ways that I can give them control? Give them 2 choices of outfits or 2 choices of foods, or any ways that you can give them control over things that really does not have a big difference regardless of the choice that they make. Be gentle and kind. Give the choices in things that are safe to have some sense of control. So we just talked about that. We want to give them as much control as they can, because really they are negotiating for as much control that they are able to have at this stage of their grief process. In the stage of deep sadness, the child's behavior may include things such as social and emotional withdrawal, general anxiety. Maybe the child is easily brought to tears. The child is easily frustrated and overwhelmed by minor stressors. Maybe listlessness, an inability to concentrate and short attention span, robot-like behaviors. In severe cases or in younger children, you might see head banging, rocking, eating, or sleeping disturbances. Again, during this stage, our kids, I think, are starting to realize that this circumstance that they're living in is really happening, and now they just feel such deep sadness. So what can you do to help support the child? Be available. Check on them often if they are withdrawn. Validate their sadness as completely understandable given all that they've gone through. Again, saying things, simple things like, I can only imagine how sad you must feel. I'm sure I would feel really sad too if I experienced everything that you are. Gently acknowledge their losses out loud. Consider having them write their losses down with your support, or creating a poem or a story, or just help them create some way of honoring the grief that they're experiencing. Support as you would anyone who is grieving. Give them extra time, kindness, and comfort in your words. Continue to provide fun activities, but don't pressure them to be playful or in a light mood if that's not how they're feeling. If they are comforted by touch, then maybe it's appropriate for a hug or to hold their hand. And recognize that sadness at much later stages of life, as they reach other milestones, really might become a reality. Maybe such as a wedding or the birth of a child, or even things like graduation or going to college. Deep sadness can show up again and again as you think about that first slide that we looked at with the stages of grief. That I think for any of us who have experienced significant loss, sadness is something that we experience often, and it's not just something that we experience once and just goes away. The final stage that we're going to look at is the stage titled understanding. And in this stage, maybe the child's behavior may include things such as developing new attachments in the new family, finding their place in the family and feeling like they belong, identifying as part of the family, such as wanting to use their last name or maybe dressing more like them, experiencing pleasure and fun and wanting to participate in family activities, more stability in their emotional responses, maybe more interest and participation in activities and just what's going on around them, an interest in and planning for future activities. So maybe at this stage, the child is saying, okay, I really can understand what's happening, and there's a part of me that is okay with that. So what can you do? Talk openly with a child about good times and bad times, including times with all of the family that they've lived with. Acknowledge any longings they continue to have towards their birth family, including taking the lead and finding out more information for them when they were younger and supporting any searches they might choose to do when they're older. Clarify your relationship to one another and be planful about your future together. Let the child lead in conversations or in things such as claiming that they choose to do with you. Keep connections to people, places, and cultures that the child had. Understand that this is not a fixed state, and there may be many periods, especially during other milestones, that may trigger former grief responses. So while this is the last stage that we're talking about, again, if we go back to that picture on the first slide when we looked at the stages of grief, understanding is one stage. So maybe this looks like a child ends up being adopted by your family, and they're excited and they're looking forward to being able to stay at your home forever. But maybe there's also feelings of deep sadness that come up at the same time, because that means they're not going to be able to live with their birth family again. And those two feelings can live together at the same time. So again, maybe the child's really excited. They're feeling that they understand their current situation. But then as they get older and they hit their teen years and they begin to ask questions about their identity, they look at other stages of grief, such as anger, and saying, well, why couldn't I live with my birth family? So again, I think you get the picture that just because a child goes into a stage of understanding doesn't mean that they're not going to revisit other stages of grief as well. So we're just going to highlight, and I guess this is kind of a review of some of the things that we've just talked about. How can you help your child deal with loss? Give voice to the ambiguity. So maybe you say something like, it has to be really hard to not know what will happen in the future. Or, I bet it's sad to see your birth mom and then to have to leave. Something else that you can do is to acknowledge and validate your child if she feels, as she expresses feelings of loss. Saying something like, it's understandable that you feel sad today. Give your child permission to grieve the loss of their birth family without guilt. Saying something like, it does not hurt my feelings to talk about your birth mom. What do you love about her, or what do you miss most? As we give our kids permission to do this, it really helps them be able to process their grief and be able to build new relationships. Suggest times and places where the child is welcome to express his grief and ways in which he can grieve. So this might be talking, journaling, drawing, or venting feelings through intense exercise. And these are just a few options, and I'm sure you'll come up with some more of your own. Include pictures of birth family throughout your home or in their bedroom, or complete a life book together for the child to see. We don't want to just pretend that if the child doesn't have these visual reminders that they're not going to be thinking about their birth family. So these are some things that we can do. Just a few other thoughts on how to help children deal with loss. Just be conscious and aware of how certain events, such as birthdays, holidays, or even an adoption finalization, might trigger feelings of loss for that child. So maybe on a birthday, depending on the age of the child, you might say something like, I bet your birth mom and dad are thinking about you today too. Help them know that it's okay on their adoption hearing day to have feelings of gladness and sadness all at the same time, because both of those emotions can live together. Keep your expectations reasonable. As a child's need to grieve over their ambiguous losses go on throughout their life, it's rare that it's ever completely resolved, right? For any of us who have lived through the grief or of a significant person, that stays with us, but we can continue to move forward and just help them understand that that's a normal part of grief. Let your child know that feelings related to these losses will come and go at different times of their life, and just provide a safe person for them to talk to. So maybe that's you, maybe that's their spouse, maybe it's a grandparent or a therapist. But I think if we can prepare our kids and help them know, not in a scary way, but in a reassuring way, that it's normal to have these feelings and it's hard and that it's just important to talk about them. You can also model healthy and normal responses to loss. So as you as an adult go through hard times, talk to your child and process things like, wow, I'm really feeling sad right now. And you can start to show them through example some of what it looks like to grieve. So what we're going to do next is watch a short clip from the video Inside Out. And I love this clip because I think it shows exactly what we need our kids to be able to do and experience, more so what we need to do as adults and what our kids are experiencing. So let's watch this clip.
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the dump! Riley and I are going to the moon! Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the train!
Oh, we made it! We're finally gonna get home! Oh no, these facts and opinions look so similar.
Don't worry about it. Happens all the time.
I don't know about you, but I love that clip from the movie Inside Out. Bing Bong was the main character's imaginary friend and clearly going through something that made him feel very sad. And I think it's so interesting that joy the emotion Joy, the character Joy, wanted to cheer Bing Bong up, right? She says things like, it's going to be okay, and we can fix this. And she's smiling and she's laughing and trying to get him to do the same. And none of this made Bing Bong feel any better. And then Sadness comes in, and Sadness sits right down beside Bing Bong and says, I'm sorry. They took something away that you loved. I bet you and Riley had great adventures. It's sad. And I think what's interesting is Joy is in the background saying, stop, Sadness, you're just going to make it worse, right? But that's not what happens. After sitting with Sadness for a while, Bing Bong was ready to head to the train station. And Joy asked Sadness, how did you do that? And Sadness said, he was just sad, so I listened to what he said. And I just think this is a beautiful example of what we really are called to do for our kids. As we journey with kids who have experienced so much loss, may we, like Sadness, sit next to them, allow them to grieve, and continue walking with them on their journey.